Okay, welcome everybody. We'll get started. The theme of STARNET 9, the big release that we're going to be talking about today, is broadening the appeal. As many of you guys know, STARNET has always been renowned for making least squares adjustments accessible to beginner users, while also providing industry standard results that experienced users and managers of large projects really rely on. So STARNET 9 provides a lot of new features that are going to be appealing to both those new or inexperienced users, as well as a power user. And I think you guys are really going to find these handy in your day-to-day work. There's a lot of customizable options and things like that that are really going to allow you to make STARNET and the interface customized to the way you use the program. We'll just go to the next slide, Jim, if you'd like. So my name is James Thomas. I'm working in the technical support department here at MicroSurvey. I'm going to be your guest host for today. We also have Olivia Floyd, who also works in technical support. She's going to be answering any questions that you have during the webinar. And our main presenter today is James Johnston, who is our technical support and training manager. He's going to be the one that's covering all of the new features in STARNET 9. We'll just go over some housekeeping things. First, there is a PDF handout that you can access through the webinar toolbar. That covers all the features and benefits of STARNET 9. So I definitely recommend you guys download that and take a look. Brian, our development manager, put that together, and it covers all of the new features that are included in this release. If you have any questions at all during the webinar, you don't need to wait until the end. You can type those into the chat box in the webinar toolbar. Olivia and myself will be answering those as we receive them. We can save some until the end if we don't get to them. And if we do miss your question, we will follow up after, or you can easily get a hold of us through the help desk and submit a support ticket or contact your sales representative. We are recording this webinar as well, so you guys can access it anytime afterward. You can contact your sales rep. We're going to post a link on the website, and I do believe a link should be sent to you directly after it's done. Also, there are going to be a couple special offers at the end. We'll discuss those after Jim is done speaking. So definitely stick around and see what we've got to offer you. So without further ado, I'll introduce Jim, who's going to be our main speaker today.
James, thanks for the introduction. And I'll take over. So what I'd like to do here is give you kind of a quick overview of the four main topics that we'll go over in this presentation. And as James has mentioned, we've got a couple of attractive promos to mention at the end of the webinar, as well as a question period. So looking forward to your questions. Did I anything else you need to say, James, before I plunge into it?
No, I think we should be good. The only thing is I do notice your Windows toolbar is still displaying.
Oh,
so I don't know if that's going to block off anything on the...
That's not good. Okay, we're clear. All right, so the agenda here, as you can see, I'm going to do four sort of main areas, talking about new features that have been built into STARNET 9, and really they do kind of fill the full spectrum of needs for users. So we've got beginning users and we've got power users, and you're all going to find the new features handy, but I could tell that some of the features are going to be of most use to the power users. Some of them are going to be of most use to the novices. So for the power users, what we've got in the background is a 64-bit upgrade to STARNET. That's something that people have been talking about for years. What you're going to see is if you're in a large adjustment, I've done a bit of bench testing, and I've seen that when you run large adjustments, STARNET can go a little bit faster. In general, speed of adjustment has never been much of an issue with STARNET because it's been renowned for its ability to run a least squares adjustment quite quickly, and for smaller ones, seconds to run an adjustment is standard. And that's always been one of the things that makes STARNET so appealing to, or so unintimidating to users, because the fact is you can do experiments with it. You can make a little change, run an adjustment, see what your result looks like, make another change, run an adjustment, look at the feedback, and the program is really good at teaching you how to use itself. And faster adjustments just make that more appealing. The 64-bit upgrade also required that we insert a new module for the built-in text editor, which is based on 64-bit, and that has really unlocked a lot of new capabilities that we're going to see in this update. So novices are going to find that inline help and auto completion make it easier to learn the product. In both cases, with both help and auto completion, a new user in STARNET, generally they'll need to learn, I don't know, about 5 codes that they normally interact with. In general, you don't have to manually type everything. Converters do most of that work, but it's common for someone to have to do a little bit of editing and learn some of the codes that go into a STARNET input file. Inline help and auto completion are going to make that process easier, and you're going to be familiar with the entries that matter to you fairly quickly. Novices are also going to find that interactive error flagging makes it easier to learn the program and to sort out issues as they're working. And what you'll find is, or in the past, whenever you had errors, there was a very easy to read panel that showed you what the errors were, and then sometimes you had to do a little bit of a search if you had a larger network, for example, to find the source of the error, and then you could easily correct it. Now we've got it so that it's more dynamic. You can click on an error and it jumps you to the source of the problem. So, and it also interacts with the bookmark features and so forth. So we're just making the program more efficient and easier to use. Power users are already going to be familiar with the find point feature that was introduced in STARNET 7 that allows you to click on a point ID in your listing, and then it'll give you a summary of all of the field entries that really affected that point. You'll see that we've taken that several new steps with this release. Okay, so on to the first part of my presentation. I've noticed in the sign up and also in our poll that there's a minority of people to whom STARNET is new. And what I'd like to do is just give you a quick overview of what a typical STARNET least squares adjustment workflow looks like. And while we're at it, in this graphic, what I've done is some of the items are going to be made easier, so I've highlighted them in red. So the typical least squares adjustment starts with importing or inputting data. Back in the 80s, what you had to do was type up a text file and then STARNET would read it. Over the years, various converter tools have been built by both STAR Plus and by MicroSurvey that greatly reduces the amount of manual input that's required. And also a lot of third-party manufacturers have built STARNET output tools. So your first task is generally turning your input data from whatever format you originally collected it to a format that STARNET can read. The second task, generally, when you're doing an adjustment, is you're going to go into that central panel that you see there, and you're going to edit your data so that it makes sense to STARNET. And that's usually a matter of deciding what points you're going to hold to, formatting or commenting in and commenting out what you want your input data to look like. And you're generally going to be doing this in an interactive way, so that sometimes you're even running it and looking at your errors to see where you've made mistakes. And also, you can see that I've highlighted this part of the process in red, and that's because the context-sensitive help feature is going to make it much easier to remember how you're supposed to format your input, and auto-completion is also going to reduce the amount of typing that you have to do. But again, this is a fairly quick part of the process. Novice users are going to spend a bit more time in it during their first couple of adjustments. And as I'd mentioned, one of the things that makes STARNET so appealing is that if you're not sure if you've got things complete, it's okay just to run and look at the error messages, because the program is built to quickly give you feedback and correct things. So again, I've highlighted that one in red because the 64-bit version is going to make the adjustment a little bit quicker. Power users are going to appreciate the improvement. Next, what you're going to do, as I'd mentioned, is you don't always get it right the first time. That's fine. When you run the adjustment, now I'm giving you a look at one of the new features, the interactive error listing. So you'll notice how on the right panel, we've got the familiar listing of all the errors that were part of the adjustment. And what you've got now is the ability to click on the red highlight and it will jump to that spot in your input file. And there you can see you're also seeing the context-sensitive help in this screenshot. So I've got that little yellow panel that pops up, and it's showing me a little bit of information about the problem. And you can even see there's some text that shows you how that line should have been formatted. Very often makes it easy to sort out any kind of small errors. The next step in a least squares adjustment is to have a look at the Chisquare test. And so what you're looking at on the left-hand side is the processing summary. So this is essentially a single number that gives you the information on how well the overall adjustment fits together and how well each of the individual types of measurements fit into the adjustment. What you're looking at on that panel is a statement about whether or not the Chisquare test passed. And then you're also going to see in the statistical summary part of it, there's a little summary of the angles, the distances, the zeniths, and the total. The error factor number, that's a number that in a typical adjustment, you're looking for that number to approach 1. What the number 1 means essentially is that your constraints match your final results, or in more common terms, expected level of error matches actual level of error. That's a sign of a properly done least squares adjustment. And so what you'll typically be doing is running an adjustment using the Chisquare test as your first clue as to whether or not things fit well together. You're also going to use the network plot, and when you look at it, it's very easy to see how you can how well your network fits together, whether or not it has the shape you're expecting. That's very often a clue as to how well your input data fits together. And you'll notice how you've also got arrows that are going to give us some clues as to how much redundancy that we've got in our measurement. And that little panel just acts like a little CAD window that allows you to zoom in and out. You can also add aerial imagery in the background. I've got a little example of that. And very often people will take advantage of the fact that you can export a KML file and have a look at your network in Google Earth. A really good way to check if your coordinate systems are correct and sort of see the whole network in context. The next stage in a typical least squares adjustment is to go through the listing in detail and look for outliers. In a larger network, just because the Chisquare test passed, that doesn't mean that there might not be a few measurements that don't really belong in there. You don't want to see them buried. And so the process of inspecting your listing and looking for outliers, making decisions about whether or not to include certain measurements, is now made easier. You'll notice how I've highlighted the listing in red again. And one of the subtle changes that I'm going to be pleased with is that your listing, when you've got the listing index tree open, is going to remember the spot you were looking at the last time you ran the adjustment, or when you run the adjustment. So it's very common if, for example, you're looking through your data for a problem in the zenith, and so you might want to go in there and make a couple of changes in your input and run a couple of adjustments as an experiment. Now the listing stays open to the zenith section so that you don't have to constantly reopen the listing and find your zenith section. It's going to stay there in front of you until you're done. And so the typical process as you're at this stage in a least squares adjustment is that you'll be making small changes, running the adjustment, inspecting the listing, and as I say, essentially you rinse and repeat until you're satisfied with the results. And then as a final step, whenever STARNET runs, it'll create an ASCII file in the background. And what you'll typically do is, it's a file with the extension PTS. What you'll typically do is you'll import that file into a CAD program and then just carry on with your project. You've also got, as I'd mentioned, KML files that you can output. You've got a printing tool that allows you to put together a report that includes the listing and a picture of the plot, and these are all additional things that help to support your least squares adjustment and give a very detailed summary of how it was put together. So that, for the new users, that's the overall process of doing a least squares adjustment in STARNET. And as I mentioned, the experienced users are going to see those red text highlights. Those are things that have made this process easier. Okay, so first, let's talk about the context-sensitive help tips and the auto-completion feature. So these are, I could summarize those as sort of some new pop-up features that you're going to see at the first time you open up the program and start playing around with your input data. So here's a little picture of what the context-sensitive help will do for you. So this highlight here, this is what you're typically going to see now when you mouse into one of your input files. You'll see that a little floating panel. I'm showing you the sort of stock configuration. A little floating panel pops up, and you'll see how what it's giving you right off the bat is a little preview of how that line is supposed to be formatted. That just makes it easier. As soon as I type in that DV line so that the program recognizes what type of an input line you're typing, it'll give you that clue for the formatting. So you don't really have to go back to your help files as often now. You'll also notice that this message is context sensitive. So for example, if it's a 2D adjustment that you're inputting, it'll modify the formatting clue to match that. Or if you're in a part of the world where you list eastings and northings first, it'll give you that help. I've showed you the stock configuration, and we've also made it so that it's highly configurable. New users are probably going to want to see more information in that pop-up window. So if you go to the options and to the editor, that's a new section in the menu, then this pops up the editor options panel that you can see on the right. So you can ask for a little bit of help, or you can ask for a lot of help. That's all configurable in this new dialog. I'm going to go through a couple of examples where this new feature will apply, and I'll give you an example of the lots of help and the little help and what they look like on the screen. Okay, so first of all, here's a image just showing you how auto completion will work. So you'll notice how what I've done is I've typed in a .alias and a pop-up has appeared saying, aha, this is the type of input that you want to type. Let me help you complete that. So what you'll see as soon as it sees that I've started typing .alias, the pop-up appears, and if I just hit my down arrow, then it'll select from the suggestion list what I want to type, and it'll complete my work right away. So that'll just cut down on on the amount of time you spend typing, and it'll also cut down on misspelling errors that that aren't going to be understood by the program. In the past, the color sensitive feature has always made it easy for you to tell if your formatting was correct. Now this will make it so that you don't even have to type it all out. Here's another quick look at the stock configuration of the help tip. So you'll notice how as soon as I click in any one of my input lines, then that little yellow text will pop up showing me what the formatting should be. You can just hit your escape key if you want to hide that notification, or as I'd mentioned before, if you already have these things memorized, then you can just turn off that feature in the options menu. Now here's an example that the beginning users are going to find just really interesting. If you go into the options menu and you ask for lots of information, here's the maximum amount of information that can be shown. What I've done is I've just highlighted that DM line, and so you'll notice how it's given you a little bit of a description of what a DM line is meant for. You'll notice how it's giving you the formatting clue. You'll also notice how there's a See Also section, and it's showing you related commands. So you'll notice how generally when you've got a DM line, you're also going to be inputting a DB and a DN, for example. The See Also section, that's also context sensitive, so you can click on the code and it'll give you some help. And right down the bottom, you've got related options, options that often are part of this type of an input line. You can also hit the F1 button if you want to jump to the full help menu on that input code. Okay, so I've shown you minimal help and maximum help, and here's a quick little preview of what the F1 key will give you. So you notice how I've just highlighted that M line on line 26, and I just hit F1 and the help file opens up, open to the article that you're probably going to want to read.
Yeah, Jim, if I could interject maybe just for a second before you move on. Yeah, I just wanted to add that the features that he just showed are, or at least I found them really handy in my experience using it and helping users, because where we're getting a lot of data of different formats from different people, I'm often looking at different record types, and I may not have used a record type for a few weeks or months or something, so I don't often remember exactly the formatting. So the help file being live and right there to look at is actually really time saving, because I don't have to go open the help menu, do a search for what an M record is, figure out the formatting, and then go back into my DAT file and change it. I just click, boom, it's right there. I know that I need to put my slope distance and then my zenith angle or something like that, and it's made it really quick and easy. So I sort of want to emphasize that fact for those of you watching, that I think you'll really find it helpful, especially when you get into a situation where you might be inputting a different data format that you're not necessarily familiar with.
I'm pleased you're noticing that, James. And really, the next time I do a STARNET training class, I'm looking forward to telling people to use that feature, because they're just going to find it's going to make it so much easier to learn some of the seemingly old-fashioned input methods, but at the same time really comfortable, input methods that users are really comfortable with. So, okay, and so following along the same theme now, whereas before the inline help is helping you with input before your adjustment, after the adjustment, as I mentioned before, it's very common to have to look at error messages and sort out a problem or two. And so we've now got interactive error listing, and what I thought I'd do is just go through a couple, two examples. I've got a simple project to start with, and I'll show you how the dynamic error linking will make it really easy to find an error, correct it, and then run the adjustment. And then I've got another one where we've got a really complex project where you're going to find that multiple errors are easy to access and, again, easy to address. So here's a simple little project. This is actually something I did last week on my holiday. I was surveying a Bible camp. And so let me go in here. So I've got a quick little video, and I'll just pause it in a couple of spots to show you how this works. Pardon me, I'm having mouse troubles. Okay, so typically what you're going to do once you've done the input task is you're going to run the adjustment, and now you can see where the new error listing is on the right. And so that's actually a familiar type of an error listing, except you'll notice that the error message itself is highlighted in red. What that allows you to do is click on the red, and the program will automatically in the input panel make the text file that contains that input line visible, and it'll jump to that line. And you can see it's also highlighted it with a red bookmark. In the past, what you needed to do when you had this kind of an error was sometimes you had to do a search if you had long input, but the line number and the file number always makes it fairly easy to spot it. Now we've got it a little bit more dynamic. Okay, so and I'll also let's go through the process of just fixing this one single error. So I'll play on a little bit, and now the well-established program has always had that little line of asterisks there, and I always like during my training sessions telling people what that line of asterisks means. Notice how the line of asterisks extends and then it stops at a point, and you'll notice how here I've got a letter in the input file, and the line of asterisks is just the clue that tells you here's where STARNET got confused, and that usually steers you to correcting a message or correcting an input error. And so now that we've got the dynamic error linking, you can pick on the red text and it will just jump straight to that spot in your input file. And here I'm using the pop-up help, because what it will do, it'll not only give me the clue as to how formatting should be, but you'll notice how there's a little caret character that shows you the same spot that the line of asterisks did. So it's also telling me that that letter in place does not belong or confuses STARNET. And if I can direct your attention to the formatting message down below, what the formatting message is telling me is that the, I guess it would be the third segment of the input, STARNET is going to look for an M line. It's going to see the @from to, which is what you've got here. It's going to look for a horizontal angle, which STARNET was happy interpreting. And then it's going to look for a slope distance. Now that letter can't be a slope distance. So that's where STARNET stopped understanding our input. And so there's my clue. It looks like I just made a little keystroke error in inserting the wrong character. So all we do is we go in there, highlight it, hit the backspace key to delete it, and we can finish the process off by running the adjustment. There I've got a passing chi-square test, and I've even put some aerial imagery in the background so that you can see the project in context. Okay, so that's how you would handle a single formatting error. Now here's an example where we've got a larger project. So what I'm showing you in this slide is I'm just contrasting the old the old error listing and the new error listing. You'll see everything is identical. The only difference is the right-hand panel is showing the STARNET 9 version, and you can see how it's just highlighted each of the errors in red. So that red is the area where you can click in, and it'll jump you right to the source of the problem. I want to go through an example of a project that has multiple errors in it because I want to show you the various features that are built in that'll allow you to dynamically jump to those error messages. So first example here, you can see I've clicked on the first red highlighted area and it's jumped me to where my first error is. So I've got another red pop-up that tells me a little bit of information about the error. Now I can click on to the next one, onto my next line, and what you can see is whereas before, and let me just back up, before it had the tilt.dat file open, the one that's highlighted in blue at the top, and now on the next slide you can see that it's automatically opened up the yellow highlighted input file, and again it's jumping right to the appropriate line in that file. Now I've jumped on to the third group of errors, and so I'll direct your attention as well to what's happening on the left. You'll notice how there are 4 red bookmark arrows. We've now got different types of bookmarks. The red ones always show where errors are. And people who are used to using bookmarks will already know that they can just use their F2 key if they want to be able to cycle through the bookmarks. So now we've kind of expanded that capability. So it's also easy for me to use the F2 key to jump from bookmark to bookmark, or in other words, from error to error when we're at this stage of the editing process. So the F2 key makes it easy to jump through those different errors. Another thing that you can do is take advantage of the online help. You can click on the red error message and notice how it brings up that example that we saw before, where I've got a little clue about the formatting and I've got a caret showing me where STARNET got confused. I'll move on. I'll just click through a few of the other lines. Another thing that you can do as you're going through the errors is you can click in any one of the lines and just check on the formatting, again using the context-sensitive help. And finally, with any one of those lines, I can use the F1 key. Again, it jumps me to the relevant section of the help file. Sometimes errors are a little bit more puzzling, and you've got to do a little bit of reading to figure out what's happening. So lots of new ways of sort of cycling through errors, and the experienced users are just going to recognize how this just makes it so much easier to plow through a large project and make everything work.
I'll just mention too, Jim, from watching Brian's demo yesterday, one thing that I noticed right away is it will jump you, as soon as you run the adjustment and you see any errors, it's going to jump your DAT file to the first error in that list, so you don't actually have to scroll to it. So that's kind of one of those examples where you can see just a bit of time saving. If you've got several DAT files, maybe thousands of lines long potentially, you're not going to need to scroll up and down to find those errors. You're just going to hit run. You'll see them displayed in the errors listing on the right, and your DAT file is going to have them presented right in front of you immediately.
Nice. Okay, on to the next topic, enhanced fine point functionality. So from the release of STARNET 7 and onward, we've had a feature called Fine Point. And what that allows you to do is look at your listing, and any particular station or point ID that you see in the listing, you're able to double click on it, and what it'll show you is a summary of all the measurements that affect that point, and the summary is also dynamically linked to your input files. So what I'll do here is I'll do a little review of the existing fine point functions, because I know that some people are pleasantly surprised that those abilities are there. And then what I'll do is I'll talk about how we've taken them sort of the next step and made the fine point tool even more useful. So a typical fine point, or the existing fine point feature that's been around since 7, that allows you to look in your listing, and you'll notice how I've highlighted one of the stations, I've double clicked it, and then you'll notice how down on the bottom screen, down in this area here, you've got the summary of all of the measurements that affect that one station. And the other ability that's in FindPoint is you can work with the summary itself. It's dynamically linked to your input files. So when I double click on any one of the entries in the FindPoint panel down the bottom, then it'll automatically, just as with the other features that we've shown you, it'll automatically open up that particular input file, and it'll highlight the line that you want to look at. Also, this is another subtle feature that some people haven't discovered, and I'm always happy to tell people about it. Also, when you're looking in the listing, every single measurement is going to be given an address, the file line section of the listing. And what that generally means, you can see I've got 1:114 in that line. What that means essentially is that the first input file, line 114, that's where this particular measurement was found in the input data. And so you've always been able to highlight the colon, and then it automatically jumps you to that spot. Makes it easy for you to go in and make corrections, weight or unweight things. We've enhanced it a little bit with STARNET 9. It always used to be that you had to highlight just the colon and then do a double click, and I always used to find that to be a fussy operation to do, even though it was so much easier than randomly looking through things. And so it's easier to use now. Essentially, you can highlight any part of the file line, do your double click, and again, it jumps you to that line. So subtle change, but again, it's going to save you time. We listen to our customers. But now we've got some new capabilities with FindPoint. We've taken it a little bit further. So now what you'll find is if you double click on a station, it will, as it always has in the past, give you a summary that is dynamically linked to your input files, but you're also going to find that it automatically centers your plot on that particular station. So now you've got graphical as well as text feedback on how that station was measured. Another thing that you're going to discover whenever you highlight and double click on a station number is that you're not just restricted to the listing. Now I'm actually working in the input panel. So notice what's happened here is that, I'll just draw your attention to it with the pen here. What I've done is I've double clicked on the station ID in the input file, and two things, or a number of things, have happened. Blue bookmarks have been added to every section of your input that references that same station. You're going to find that they're scattered throughout the whole project. Of course, you'll also see this new feature where it's going to center that station on the plot. And of course, you've got the familiar summary here that allows you to dynamically link to those measurements. And we've gone a little bit further with this. Notice how now in the input panel, what I've done here is I'm actually looking in the dump file, and I've double clicked on a station ID, and we've got the familiar FindPoint response. Now it's showing me the summary of where that point was listed, and it's showing me the plot. And you're going to find that you're not just restricted to the dump and the listing file. You're going to find that pretty well all of your output files, they'll have that FindPoint functionality. So if I've got a ground file turned on, then I can double click on stations and see the summary and see the plot. If I've got a lat longs file turned on, I can use it for that. If I've got the coordinates file, that's our PTS, the output file, you can use FindPoint on it. And of course, you can use the listing as you've always been able to do in the past. So I've always just kind of felt like whenever I'm using fine point, I kind of feel like I'm at the center of a web and I can just pull on each string to bring the information to me. This makes it even more capable. Okay, and the fourth topic, and this is one that, again, it's subtle, but I'm just totally tickled to see it, so I can't wait to show it to you. Anyone who's used some advanced text editors, Notepad++ is my favorite. They've learned that you've got the ability to do column edits, and very often people will just use these third-party Notepad editors just because it makes it easier to edit your STARNET files, then they just put them back into STARNET. Well, we've got column edits built into STARNET now, and what I thought I'd do here is just go through one more example of what a typical adjustment would be so that I can show you how column edits make that easier. And I noticed at least one of the people who signed up for the class asked a question, and this is going to be the answer to it. You were asking about how you could unweight zeniths, for example, and I'll give you an example here that'll make that clear. So here's a typical troubleshoot that you'll go through with STARNET. So what I've got here is an example from my training files where we've got a Chisquare test that has failed. Now we go into the processing summary to find a clue as to where what the cause for the failing chi-square test was. And so what you'll see is you've got a total error factor of 15, which, let me just turn on the pen here. I'm looking at that section there, and now that's a number that, remember before I was saying that you're typically looking for that number to approach 1, and the reason that the chi-square test is failing is because that number is failing to fall between these two numbers. And so I like to go a little bit further, and I want to find out what type of measurement is causing that problem. And so let's just turn off the highlighting here. And so I'm going to look through the error factors. And sorry, let me go back a slide. I'm going to look through the error factors, and I'm going to notice that the error factor for angles is noticeably larger than the error factor for distances and azimuths. So that's a clue that I should probably look in my angle input for problems. And so in this troubleshoot, what happened was we went back to the field notes, and we found that the crew wasn't really sure about a backsite that affected those 3 measurements. And that's also backed up by, if you take a look at the listing, we've got this column here that shows the standard, the standard errors, the standardized deviation of each one of those measurements. And this is another area in the program where you're looking for a number that approaches 1. And so I'll notice how those 3 measurements, they have the greatest value in that column, and they're noticeably larger than 1. So that generally is a sign that the measurement doesn't fit well with the overall adjustment. So then what I'm going to do is we're going to do a little experiment to see if we take the effect of those measurements out of the network, what'll happen to the overall adjustment. And so here I've got a quick little video that I'll show here that shows me how I can use column editing to make a change. Okay, so column editing interacts with your Alt key. So what you're typically going to do is, you'll learn this with a tiny bit of practice. Hold down the Alt key, and then what you're going to do is left click with your mouse in the place where you want to do an edit, or at least at the bottom of a zone where you want to do an edit. Then what I'm doing here is I'm keeping the left mouse button down and I'm sliding up, and what I'm doing is I'm defining the location for a cursor, except that cursor can cover multiple rows in the input file. So I'll continue on here. Then what I do is I release my Alt button, and then as a final step, you have to hit the Alt button and release it again. And now you can see you've got a flashing cursor that covers 3 rows. And so I'll do a couple of examples here. What I've input here is 3 asterisks. Now the asterisk has a special meaning to STARNET. It essentially means that we call it float or give no weight to a particular measurement. So what I've done already here with my input data is I've set up STARNET so that it will read each of these 3 input types, but it's going to give them no weight in the overall adjustment. So that's one way of asking STARNET, what happens if I just make these 3 measurements have no effect on the measurement? Let's do a couple of other examples of how you can use what we call these the fixity symbols. I've shown you asterisks. Now here's another example that you wouldn't want to follow in this case. I've used exclamation marks. The exclamation mark fixity symbol means hold this measurement as fixed and make the rest of the adjustment fit around it. So that would make my problem even worse if I used exclamation marks. What I'm going to do as the third example is show you a more sophisticated way of handling this situation. You've already seen the asterisks, but now what I'm inputting is an ampersand, or that's an and symbol or a shift 7 on a North American keyboard. The ampersand has sort of a third specific meaning as a fixity symbol. What it essentially means is treat that particular measurement as normal. So we've reweighted these measurements so that effectively what we're doing is we're telling it in all 3 of these rows, use the asterisk to weight the horizontal angle. Remember, we are suspicious about a backsite on those horizontal angles, so I'd like to treat them as float. And then we've got an ampersand, which applies to the second row of measurements in the input file. So we're just telling it, treat those slope distances as if they were normal. Weight them the way you weight everything else in the project. And then the final ampersand applies to the third measurement item in this list, and that's the zenith angle. So we're also going to tell it to treat the zenith angle as if it was normal. So we've, in a very sophisticated way, we have told it, leave these parts of the measurement as float, treat everything else as normal. And then you go back to your adjustment and you run it. And let me just go back to one more slide. Here's a little more specific explanation of how we were inputting it. So notice it's a star, an ampersand, and an ampersand. And then the next step would be to rerun the adjustment. Remember, I've always said STARNET makes it easy to learn because you can run it again and again and look at your feedback. So if you look at the adjusted angle observations section, and let me just draw your attention to that. So what I'm looking at is this section of the listing. And you'll notice how, this is the term I was stumbling on. The standardized residual here, you can see that you've got numbers that don't approach 1 as you're looking for. You can see larger numbers that represent measurements that don't fit well within the network. But remember, I haven't run the adjustment yet. Now, after I run the adjustment, here's what the result looks like. So notice how our first indication that we're doing things properly is that, sorry, I'll just turn that pen back on, is that the error factors are all approaching 1. You'll notice how we've got a statement saying that, in this case, the chi-square has exceeded the lower bound, and that just generally, that's what I will term sort of the good news error message, because it means that our measurements are actually better than expectations. But this is the part that I'm really tickled about. You'll notice how we're still looking at the adjusted angle observations in the listing, and you can see how the standardized residuals, now they're approaching 1. So that means that we've been successful in identifying the problem that was causing the chi-square test to fail before. And the thing that I think is cool is that because I've still got that section of the listing index tree open, it remembers my spot while I do multiple runs. Just a little bit of convenience. So we've had Olivia watching the chat line, and it looks like some questions have come in. Olivia, do you want to go through the list of at least the questions that the whole audience will want to hear answers to?
Sure. Yeah, we have a few questions here. The first one I see is, can we import Rhinex data?
All right. James, I think you were talking to someone about that recently.
No, you muted.
Sorry about that, guys. Rhinex data we don't import directly, but we are partnered with a company called EasyServe that has a post-processing solution. And when you process your Rhinex data through EasyServe, there is a STARNET import routine, or I guess an export routine from EasyServe. So there are options out there for you.
Great.
And the next one I see here is a customer has an ongoing monitoring project. Can STARNET be used for that?
Yeah, I'll take that. Monitoring is one of my secret delights with STARNET. I know that there are some really sophisticated uses of monitoring that use STARNET, and you know, to the point where we're looking at, I think there's one interesting monitoring project in the UK where they have 52 automated total stations monitoring the construction of a huge train station, and it's all run through STARNET. Yes, STARNET's really useful for monitoring. It can be used at an automated level for, you know, really sophisticated use, or the vast majority of people who use STARNET for monitoring, they're just going in there at, let's say, monthly epochs and redoing measurements. STARNET not only gives you precise results because it handles your redundant measurements, but it gives you results that are weighted. So, you know, they make sense, and it makes it much easier to make decisions about whether or not movement is actually occurring or whether you're just looking at normal random errors. So yes, STARNET, very useful for monitoring, and not too hard if you've already got an ongoing monitoring project. It's not too hard just to go back, use your old data, and sort of build a history of it.
And I see the next one we have here is, can we import from Trimble Business Center?
I know about that one. And James, I think you were just talking with someone about the different options with Trimble data. Do you want to give us a bit of a summary?
Yeah, so with Trimble, there's a few different scenarios that can come up. By and large, the most popular is the job XML format. But to get into a little bit more detail, you want to be exporting your job XML data from the controller, because that contains all of the observation information, rather than from TBC. You can also export Trimble Data Exchange format, which is for all your post-process data, all your static observations. If you're just using conventional data, so no GPS, but just total station work, you can use Trimble Business Center and export Trimble style sheets, and those can be used to import your data into STARNET. And for those of you using their levels, we've got the DINI converter for the Trimble leveling data, and I believe most of those same routines work for Survey Pro as well.
Okay, and the next question, can we import vectors from Infinity, and how does Infinity work with STARNET?
And I think you and I were just talking about that. You want to tell the audience, Olivia?
Yeah, so with the latest release of Infinity, there's a new export to SCI ASCII feature, and it improves, obviously, the old workflow from LGO, and I think that just came out a couple months ago, so it's relatively new.
Yeah, and I was part of testing that feature, and one of the things that we just tried out was, what can we do if we can we improve the precision on the variances in the input? And we discovered it was really easy. One of the limitations of the old LGO SCI/ASCII format was that it only gave you about 6 decimal places of precision in the variances, and what that would sometimes have the effect of doing is, in a really complex network, your variances got buried, and sometimes you couldn't get an adjustment. But now I think it'll go to 12 decimal places of precision, and that resolves that problem.
Yeah, and we also have a workflow guide on our import guide troubleshooter online and help desk as well.
Good. What's next?
The next question, I'm just trying to see through the chat here. Will it work with my Leica 1200?
Yes, the project that I was just showing everyone just before, I was working with a Leica 1200. You can use FieldGenius to run the Leica 1200, or you can use Leica Captivate or Leica Viva to run the 1200. The only difference is which converter that you would use typically before you do the import. So you'd use a FieldGenius converter if you had FieldGenius, or you'd use the Leica DBX converter if you're using Captivate or System Viva. So yep, we're fine with almost all Leica equipment.
One of the other ones I see here in the chat line is it possible to input vertical angles rather than zenith angles?
I'm going to think about that. Vertical.
I believe you can through the project options.
Oh, you can. Okay. Well, I do know this, and keep on using the chat line for Olivia. So if you need to clarify, you are able to input a delta V or a vertical distance rather than a zenith angle and a slope distance. That is an option. Is that the one that you're referring to, James?
I think so. Yeah, we can.
Yep, you can do it that way.
Yeah.
But
okay.
yeah, Olivia, keep an eye on the chat line, and let's have that person tell us if we properly answered that question.
Sure. The next one I see here is, can I combine level and GPS data?
And yeah, you were just talking about someone, or talking to someone about that in training, weren't you, Olivia?
Yeah, so it's perfect for combining level, conventional, post-process GPS, and RTK data types from many manufacturers, as we have all the converters there to do that.
Yeah, like people who love STARNET know that's always been its strength, is it'll work with multiple types of data, and it'll give you one answer from multiple sources.
Sure, I'm just trying to go through the chat line here to see if there's any other good ones in here. James, do you see any?
Terry had asked, we do projects across the entire country for various clients, so we need a way to select specific company defaults for various clients. Oh, so I believe with that one, Jim, could you make multiple company default files and just switch them intermittently? I know we can do instruments. We can definitely create instrument profiles.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but he's talking about the fact that they do projects in different regional locations, so yeah, they'd want to have different state plane or coordinate systems just as a default. So that just sounds like a really good idea, but at this point, no, we don't have that ability. The company options are defined by a single file that's stored in program data called the company.def. Yeah, there's no reason that we couldn't add an additional option that would allow you to select between multiple company files. At this point, the only answer is just keep additional copies of company def files and just kind of swap the files around. That's a neat idea.
Let me just see here. Someone's asking when version 9 will be available.
What a relevant question. It's as far as I understand, it's available as we speak. The release date was timed perfectly for today. In the follow-up email, we'll send everyone a link so that you can grab a download, or you might just find that if you open up our website that we've already got it posted.
Okay. James, do you see any other good ones there? I'm just trying to see which ones we've replied to and which ones we haven't.
Yeah, I'm just sorting through here as well. Michael had asked about the column editing and if we could do sorting. Unfortunately, we can't sort by columns in the text editor. It's more for replacing larger groups of text in one go. But that's also another feature that we could look at adding. I think that's about it.
All right.
I think we covered everything in the chat line.
Oh, that's good.
Question section.
Okay, we didn't miss anyone. But if we did miss you, either in the direct response or in the over-the-air response, we'll follow up with you after the webinar. So, okay, well then, let's tie things up. Again, thanks everyone for spending your valuable time with us. As you can see on this last slide, there are a couple of promos. The one on the right is the one that I really want to draw your attention to. It might look a little bit too good to be true. It's a smoking deal. If you buy a new seat of STARNET during September, it's 50% off. If you buy an upgrade during September, it's 50% off. You don't have to say you were in the webinar. It's an existing promotion that we have this month. Please do take advantage of that if you're considering a purchase. Also over on the left, STARNET training is my pet project and always has been. And so we've got a couple of STARNET training sessions available during the fall. I'm going to be teaching an online class starting on October the 26th. I'm happy to see we've got some sign-ups already. If you've attended this webinar, if you mention the promo code OLTSN10, then you can get a 10% discount on the tuition for the online class, but you have to register before September 29th or during the month of September. So I hope to see you in the online class if you're interested in that. If you instead prefer classroom training, there's going to be a classroom training session in Cambridgeshire in the UK, which is a short train ride north of London, and that'll be happening on November the 16th. I believe the tuition for that one is £750. I think it's a little bit better price than we charge for the online class. I know a lot of the North American users might be saying, oh, well, that's not really much use to me. It's in England. But have a look at plane tickets lately. I think you would find that the cost of flying to Kelowna here in British Columbia for classroom training is pretty comparable to the cost of flying to England. Not to mention you could stay the weekend and be a bit of a tourist. So I encourage certainly international customers. I encourage you to look into attending that training class. But North American customers might find they're welcome there as well. Or I know they'll find they're welcome, but they might find it's a good trip. So if you're a part of that training, just check on the microsurvey.com training website to do an online registration for either one of the classes. And if you're interested in taking advantage of the 50% off sale, we're going to have a follow-up email with a link so that you can do a download, and we'll be getting your contact information right away when we do that, or when you use that link. So we'll be able to call, or we'll be able to arrange a purchase, or you can call us at, and sorry, I should have left a phone number here. I think I'll put a phone number, or Olivia, can you put the toll-free and the international phone numbers in the chat line? And we'll just leave that open to give everyone a chance to do that. Or
yeah, sure, I will do that right now.
Okay. Or you can reply to the follow-up email if you need one of our sales reps to get in touch with you. Okay, I'll give it a minute while you type that into the chat line, Olivia. And so for those of you who attended, I'll wrap things up. Remember, if you want to get a hold of that handout, please look at your webinar toolbar and download the handout, which gives a little more detailed summary of the new features. And if any of your friends said that they were going to be attending, but you don't see them here, then we are recording the webinar, and we'll be posting a recording of it right away. You can visit the MicroSurvey website, or you can watch for the follow-up email that's going out in 24 hours.
And if we missed any of your questions, we'll try to get back to you. We can review them after the webinar, or you can simply create a support ticket by going to our help desk website, helpdesk.microsurvey.com. There's a link there. So I tried to get back to as many of you as possible, but if I missed you, I'll try to follow up after.
Cool. Okay. All right. Thank you to our audience for attending. Thank you to James and Olivia for your assistance with this presentation. Hope everyone has a good day, and we hope to talk to you in the future.